Winnie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Cait, it is a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Winnie, could you tell me just a little bit about where you're at right now and what your current job is?
Sure. I am at the Department of the Interior, and I am Senior Advisor and Infrastructure Law Coordinator there. And through President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law, there was $1.2 trillion going to infrastructure, the first time we've ever had a landmark piece of legislation, historic size and impact. And the Department of the Interior received $30 billion through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And my job is to help coordinate and implement and execute the $30 billion through the various programs at the Department of the Interior. And I am having a blast working with a great team at the Department of the Interior on all sorts of things, from conservation to cleaning up legacy pollution, to making sure that we've got aquatic connectivity in our streams and our public lands, and it's been just fantastic.
That is so cool. And not the first piece of landmark legislation that you've worked on. I know previously you've been at the Center for American Progress before and worked on the Equality Act. Could you tell us a bit about what CAP was like and what your work on the Equality Act was like?
Yes, absolutely. So the Equality Act is, a foundational piece of legislation, and it will, when it becomes law, not if,
Yes.
but when the Equality Act becomes law, it will go a long way toward ensuring that LGBTQ Americans and others have the kind of legal protections to prevent the kind of discrimination that we see in housing and credit and jury service and employment and in public accommodations, among other things. So it is historic, it is landmark, it is long overdue, it will pass. And like the bipartisan infrastructure law, it takes perseverance, it takes a team, it takes legislators, it takes advocates, it takes policymakers, it takes the grassroots, and it takes think tanks like the Center for American Progress to be at the forefront of ensuring that bipartisan legislation like the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Equality Act, both of them are, can become law and really can have the kind of impact that the people in this country deserve.
Yeah. One of the reasons that I joined CAP kind of throws people sometimes, and it's that I really enjoy the creativity of CAP and being able to look for unique solutions and to be able to approach problems in a way that maybe we haven't before, especially right now when the LGBT community is facing a lot of difficult challenges. There's a lot of attempts to roll back our rights. There's a lot of negative rhetoric happening. The opportunity for creativity was really important to me and something that I really value here at CAP. I'm curious what drew you to CAP and what was really exciting to you about working here.
Okay, what's really interesting is I joined CAP in 2006, and it is similar to you in that it was a place that afforded people the ability to think and to be creative, just as you're saying. Mm-hmm. So those are very similar kinds of concerns I had about the LGBTQ community and about what the Center for American Progress had to offer. So when I joined CAP in 2006, I just want to say that it was a multi-issue think tank. It was only a couple of years old, and while there were queer people who worked here, there was no LGBTQ team. There was no dedicated presence here at the Center for American Progress to address the challenges that our community faced. And John Podesta, who was the founder of the Center for American Progress, was really one of the first progressive leaders, non-gay, to come out for marriage equality, and the Center for American Progress was for marriage equality long before many people were. Mm-hmm. But there was no dedicated team here, and so I was hired to be the Senior Vice President of External Affairs to really introduce the Center for American Progress to people on Capitol Hill, to the civil rights community, to the women's community, to labor leaders and others, because CAP was so new in early 2006. And after I'd been here for a couple of years, it's that kind of creativity, Cait, that you're talking about. I approached John Podesta and Sarah Wartell and Melody Barnes and Neera Tanden to say, hey, it's about time that the Center for American Progress, this place that has such incredible subject matter experts, thinking, policy programs in so many different areas, that actually we have a dedicated team here at CAP that was focused on the LGBTQ community. And it was the kind of place that CAP is. They said, yes, go do that. And we built the team, and I think in so many respects, the kind of creativity and challenges that you and your team work on today were part of what we wanted to do back then. And it's great to see that you're here tackling the challenges. They're different. I mean, I'd be curious to hear from you. What does an average day look like for you here at CAP leading the team?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like you said, I think there's so many issues that there's still a through line that we're really focused on. The Equality Act is still really important and seminal to working on and getting that through. Healthcare is a really big issue right now, and working on particularly protecting access to like best practice transgender medical care for the community is a big chunk of our time right now, and thinking, again, really creatively about how we can fight back directly against attacks on transgender medical care, but also find some other unique ways to just increase access, to increase even maybe affordability for LGBT folks that are trying to just get their basic healthcare needs met. Really exciting recently, the Affordable Care Act, Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act was recently updated to provide non-discrimination protections in healthcare for the LGBTQ community, where federal funding exists in healthcare, which is most healthcare, which is really exciting. So that was a big win to see happen for the community. And so working again on those pieces that maybe we don't think of immediately when we think about healthcare is, how can we make current healthcare options more accessible and more safe for LGBT folks is a really big piece. And working certainly on school issues for LGBT students, making schools safe for all youth, including LGBT youth, to go to school. And right now, what's really new and really interesting is tech and internet, is data, and social media is a big part of the work, and figuring out how we can make sure that any regulations and access to internet and social media are safe, and LGBT folks are thought of in those spaces as well.
Well, I think that kind of creativity and that kind of interaction that you must have with the teams that exist here at the Center for American Progress is amazing. And so one of the things that was so important about the LGBTQ work that we did here and the Equality Act is we had in-house experts on housing issues, on healthcare issues, on employment, and now in tech. And so you get to take advantage, not at another organization, but at in-house CAP experts here. And it was that kind of interaction, it was with those kinds of conversations and expertise that we relied on as we were talking about and then working with legislators about drafting the Equality Act. And so in 2013 and 2014, as marriage equality was moving through the courts, one of the things that we were very focused on here at CAP and in the LGBTQ team in particular was drafting legislation and working with people on the Hill in a bipartisan fashion to ensure that we could come up with comprehensive civil rights protections. And so, back in the late 70s, there was the Equality Act that was introduced by Bella Abzug, and it was amazing to talk to her daughter as we were introducing the legislation in the mid-2015s and so, and talk to her and say, Liz, we are taking this piece of legislation and reintroducing it. And it was broader than what had been introduced in Congress, which was just a narrow slice of the Equality Act. It was just employment protections called the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, ENDA. And that just wasn't good enough, especially as marriage equality was moving through the courts. And you were able to get married, and you were going to talk about your wedding and talk about your spouse, and yet you could be denied housing. You could be fired from your job. And so as marriage equality was moving through the courts, we at the Center for American Progress really focused very strongly on drafting and working with people to write the Equality Act. And it was really exciting to talk to people here at CAP, to talk to people in the civil rights community, the women's community, community activists and others, and really build on the work that had already been done.
Yeah. Courts are a really interesting part of this. Recently, I believe it was 2019, 2020, that Bostock versus Clayton County was decided. And Bostock affirmed that LGBTQ folks are protected from discrimination in employment. Why, after this decision, do you think the Equality Act is still important when we have this court case that affirms that, yes, it is illegal to discriminate against LGBT folks in employment?
Because we do much more than just work, and we certainly do work. We spend a lot of time doing that. But if you are protected from being fired from your job, but you can be denied housing or denied credit or denied other federal funding programs, that just doesn't work. That is not protecting our whole selves. And I think that's another piece of the exciting work that we did at the Center for American Progress and we did at the team here, but it is also a powerful story to tell people as they scratch their heads and say, well, you have marriage equality, that's all you need. You know, the community wants so much more. The other piece that continues to be a challenge, Cait, I'd be curious to hear whether you still think it is that, again, people think, well, what do you mean a gay or trans person can be fired from their job? That's simply wrong. You mean you can be kicked out of your house? That's not right. And so when we're saying we want the Equality Act passed that would protect us from that kind of discrimination, they're convinced that we already have those protections, and you must be asking for something special, something more. And so you have to first convince people that no, we can be fired from our jobs or denied housing, and then you have to say, but there's a solution. And it's a solution that is afforded to everyone else, and all we're asking for is to be treated equally.
One of my first major roles in LGBT advocacy was working on the Equality Act, and in particular organizing in some states like Alaska and Indiana and Kansas, where I'm from, and I spoke to so many people who had experiences where they were denied promotions, where they felt like they were really excluded at work, or they were told that they wouldn't be getting a job or were fired really because of their LGBT identity or because of talking about their partner or talking about going to Pride. And there are so many of these stories. There's whole banks and libraries of these stories. And so it's so interesting because we really had similar issues where folks thought it was so clear and so obvious. And so part of the education being around, well, we still have to take care of this. And I think we see that, with healthcare even still. There's two sides of this coin of, so many really big attacks right now on healthcare, and still working on basic non-discrimination protections, working on basic familiarization with just who LGBT people are. And it's a really complex exercise to get from here's the issue and we still need it solved. One of the things that I think is really interesting here is the idea of familiarization of LGBT folks. I think that's been a really interesting through line from HIV and AIDS and to marriage equality to the big 2015, 2016 fights around trans folks in bathrooms to today when we're talking about young trans people. The big theme of familiarization and having to educate about identities and educate about how everyone is really deserving of dignity and respect, right? These really basic things. And sometimes it can feel frustrating, right? To come back to, okay, we still have to do education about this identity, or we still have to do education about this community to get to point B. I'm curious if that feels like it resonates in your work around familiarization and if you have any, insight or advice on how we can do that.
Well, I think it's all about stories. It's all about people feeling comfortable telling their stories. And that is a challenge in the work that we do, whether it's on the Equality Act, LGBTQ equality more generally, or the work that I do at the Department of the Interior on legacy pollution, telling the story of how these dollars, these programs impact communities and impact people. And so when you can have people tell their own stories in an authentic way, that goes a long way toward familiarization, toward making it real for people. So there's not an abstract concept about trans health. It's not an abstract concept about someone being fired from their job or someone being denied credit. It is real, and it happened to this person here. And the more of those stories that can be told in powerful ways, which is one of the reasons why the Center for American Progress is such an incredible place, because it doesn't just have the policy expertise. It doesn't just have the foundation of a think tank. The Center for American Progress has this incredible communications arm and ability to connect with people. And so those stories, Cait, that you can collect and that you can identify can actually be told in multiple different ways over multiple different platforms. And I think that kind of power of telling a story is really important. It's one of the things that we found back in 2009 and 2010 when we were working on repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And you know, that was 14 years ago. And it, in some ways to me, who worked on it every single day, from the Center for American Progress, it feels like it was yesterday, and it feels like it was a really long time ago. That somehow someone who could volunteer to serve his or her country could say, I am willing to die for this country, for freedom, for democracy, for equality, for everyone, somehow couldn't be true to him or herself, couldn't say that they were married, couldn't say that they attended a pride celebration just yesterday, couldn't do those kinds of things. And so the effort to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell was something that I worked on very closely here at the Center for American Progress, and again had the benefit of having a national security team and having connections with people at the Pentagon to help us think through the kind of nuances of how the legislation was going to be constructed. And one of the things that we thought of here at CAP was the certification language that enabled the bill to pass in a timely fashion when the Armed Services Committees were moving through their process and the Defense Authorization Bill was moving, but after the Pentagon released its survey on how the policy repeal would affect troops' morale and retention and recruitment. And there was a timing gap with all of that, but it was fantastic that we were able to come up with this certification language that President Obama thought would pass muster, the White House approved, members of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats approved, and we were able to move it through the process. So again, it's this great combination of a think tank where you've got people who can think through topics, but also the communications and advocacy muscle that's really important, as you know from your work, to actually move legislation and ideas from ideas into action.
Yeah. Well, first, personal thank you for the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. I spent a couple years at the Air Force Academy, and it was pretty shortly after that repeal, and makes it obviously so much easier and safer to serve.
Right.
And I think it's changed so many people's lives. One of the pieces here that, like you've been talking about, there's so many different policy strengths at CAP, and LGBT folks are not a single policy issue, right? They show up everywhere. There's very few places where LGBT folks aren't. When we talk about healthcare, when we talk about climate change, when we talk about technology, I'm curious how LGBT populations and issues and communities show up in your work currently, and what that might look like.
Well, it's interesting, and we just were on the roof of the Department of the Interior recently, where Secretary Haaland was raising the pride flag, and being able to see folks being able to come to work, whether they're queer or allies, and stand on a rooftop, you know, of a federal government agency and see the pride flag raised. I think just right there, full stop, is impact and power. And I mean, you know, from coming, we do a lot at our offices. We're at work a lot. We whether we want to or not, spend a lot of hours in the workplace. And if you can't come to the workplace fully yourself, you aren't effective. There are mental health issues. we're not good colleagues, we're not good teammates, and we're not as productive as we could be. And so just the mere fact that we can do that at workplaces, especially in this administration, I think is really phenomenal. So I see our community in that way right now. But also whether it's public lands, whether it's ensuring that we are telling the full story of the United States and of the communities that have been in this country. And you know, think of Stonewall as now a national monument. And again, that was something that Center for American Progress wrote a report many years ago talking about how there were no national monuments, federal recognition of the LGBTQ community. And we released this report, and it's other communities too. We don't tell a full story of this country unless our national parks and our national monuments and our public lands reflect who we are. And so I see the LGBTQ community in my work in that way at the Department of the Interior, and it's really powerful to see. It's really wonderful.
Really wonderful. I think that makes a lot of sense. The pride flags we talk a lot about, but they really hold so much meaning and so much significance, and so I think that's really beautiful. There's always a lot of discussion, I think, about what pride means to LGBT folks, and I feel like I sometimes have an answer that's a little bit different. I came to CAP from the Trevor Project, where I worked really heavily in states and on state legislation and trying to fight back primarily against a lot of attacks in state legislatures on young LGBT people. And as you know, state legislatures tend to wrap up around May and June. And so Pride, for me, for many years, has always been like a breath, a moment to take a few weeks after sometimes really difficult and long months of advocacy. And I think a lot of people look at Pride validly and rightfully so as a really exciting and full of activity time. And for me, I tend to take a few weeks off and relax if I can, a few days off. I'm curious, what does Pride really mean for you, and how has Pride been incorporated in your career, in your life?
I think what it means to me now is different from what it meant to me when I was younger at previous positions. And I think what it means to me now is and like you, I can take a breath and I can be my full self.
Yeah.
Not necessarily after a tense state legislative session, but just an authenticity that I don't have to do anything, I don't have to march, I don't have to hug my kids, I don't have to hold my spouse's hand, but I can just be me, and I'm proud of that, and in my full self. You came from the Trevor Project to here. The job that I had before I came to the Center for American Progress was at the Human Rights Campaign, and I spent 11 years there. And like you, we had major battles. They were certainly at the state level, but they were also at the federal level. And whether it was anti-HIV and AIDS riders on legislation, whether it was attacks on DC residents and denying us the ability to adopt kids, our own kids, in fact, because we couldn't get married back in the 1990s, but there were attempts to say even you couldn't adopt someone if you were gay or lesbian. And so I think Pride then was different. It was much more of an advocacy feeling and moment and effort to gain all of the strength we could to continue to move forward. And at the Human Rights Campaign, Pride meant going out into communities and talking to people about what was at stake. And trying to be comfortable at those places where sometimes it was hard to have those conversations about who you were and about wanting to have a job and wanting to love the person that you loved. And so Pride, I think, for me has evolved as I have grown older, and it's now just a moment for me to be able to say, I can be who I am, and that's okay, and it's a wonderful thing. And I feel like Pride also is a time for me to reflect on all of the people who have helped us to get to this place.
Yeah.
And again, I think one of the things, and I'm sure you saw this at the Trevor Project and your work in the States, is that the work that we do on LGBTQ equality and your work on healthcare and trans equality and bullying in schools cannot be done with our community alone. We have a stake in it, we have a lot of power, but we are relying on and working with allies every single day. And that was one of the things that we did here at the Center for American Progress is I think work really hard to engage and enlarge and strengthen the partnerships, because there's just no way, absolutely no way, that we can do the work that we need to do without allies.
Yeah.
And I saw that every single day at the Center for American Progress.
It looks like, okay, I think we have time for one more question here. And I want to end on an exciting note, or hopefully an uplifting note. What right now are you hopeful for? What are you excited about? Or what is bringing you joy, this pride? And what are you looking forward to for the community?
Well, I'm looking forward to continued progress in the face of sometimes attacks, and as we also are witnessing some significant gains. And I think that we are gaining allies every single day. So I think if I had to point to one thing that is exciting and that gives me hope, it is that we're increasing supporters. And I know there are days where it doesn't feel like that, whether we're losing a legislative fight or have a court rule against us. And there are certainly setbacks at the individual level and in states, for sure. And that's going to continue to happen. But I think what I'm most excited about is I'm seeing more progress and more support, and the attacks are maybe even more hostile and more vitriolic, but they're fewer.
Yeah.
And again, that doesn't minimize the pain that they cause our community, but I saw it when I started this journey in my work, that there was anger, there was vitriol from our enemies as they knew they were losing. And I think I see that now, that same kind of attacks that are just unbelievable. And fewer people are taking up that mantle. So I'm hopeful. Yeah,
I absolutely am too. I think that I've seen a lot of exactly what you're saying. So I'm really excited for what the future brings for us. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure to chat with you and to learn more about you and the history of the Equality Act. So I just am really grateful for your time with us today and all the work that you've done for our community. So thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for your presence and what you do every single day for our community and for CAP and for so many. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.